Much of what you saw me take on as the franchise character came from those discussions with Terry in the dressing room.
Ribs and Terry. I don't know if he was a big rib puller in his later years, but apparently wasn't in his younger years. Do you remember any he got you with or anyone around you?
Not so much in ECW. He almost seemed like Mr. Professional Businessman in ECW. You'd see him grab a beer after a match, that kind of thing, but not before, never prior that I recall. I think he realized in hindsight that if this thing is going to work, if it's going to go, because the odds were so stacked against us, that it was going to require everything Terry could bring to the ring and everything he could bring to that dressing room. And like I said earlier, my experience was with a lot of those guys, they would hold on to that viciously, like it was a state secret or something, because I guess they feared losing their jobs or whatever, which is patently ridiculous. Terry came in, and I can honestly say he would talk to everybody. And Terry was one of those guys that, like, when he sat and talked to you, he was talking with you, and paying attention to you and addressing your things. And for me, it was just a fountain of knowledge. Like, I had never been a heel. Terry had been one of the great heels of wrestling history. And I think much of what you saw me take on as the franchise character came from those discussions with Terry in the dressing room, and not necessarily but the moves or the angles or whatever, but the development of that character, the nuances that character would take on came from Terry, both in watching and being cognizant of his earlier career, before ECW, and being like in awe of it, but also sitting down and talking to him, like on the three-way dance. Understand, it was never like him sitting me and Sabu down and saying, okay, when the match starts, we're going to do this and this and this. And then, I'll leave and Sabu will come, and then we'll do that and that and that. And then I'll come back. It was never anything like that. It was just sort of wouldn't it be funny if something like this came up? And that was a big thing with Terry. Wouldn't it be funny if boom, 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 boom. And so, like, that meaning that it may come up in the match, it may not come up in the match. But then when you would see him doing something, like in the one that I recall in the three-way dance, was when Terry was down on all fours and he was doing the running headbutts. I'm pretty sure he did it to Sabu first, and I had just come up off a bump and looked and saw him doing this, and the natural inclination was to feed, so didn't miss a beat. He turned right around and scampered toward me on all fours, headbutting, and kept doing this back and forth thing. And the three-way sleeper, he started with Sabu. And I'm sitting there, my back to the hard cam, and I'm looking up at him thinking, boy, this is perfectly set up. And hit the ropes and then gave it to him. And then we would do the switches. With Terry, you could do that stuff. He would leave his body there for you to do that stuff. And now, if he would have thought that wasn't the right way to go, he probably would have ducked his head or, like reached up and stopped me and poked me in the eye, something. Terry allowed you the leeway to be creative with him, and that made it easy. The only thing I can come close to, like, an ECW with a rib, and it wasn't a rib per se, it was the night that the ECW was doing the Terry Funk banquet, and Franny and I are in the room, and we're getting dressed to go to this banquet, and something felt wrong to me. Like, I just didn't, like, I'm like, it just wasn't there. Like, I just couldn't envision myself sitting there in character and listening to this endless night of Terry Funk's great, Terry Funk's great, Terry Funk's great. And so I looked at Franny and I said, we wouldn't show up for this thing, would we? And Franny being like a year in the business, I was like, well, you got to go. And so I called Terry, and he said, well, goddamn, Shane, you can't be there, because we're in the middle of this angle at this time. And so I called Paul and told Paul, and we stayed away. Now, the funny thing of that was, Terry would later call me that night and say, boy, everybody's pissed at you. And I thought he meant the fans, right? What he meant was the boys, like Taz and Perry. I remember coming to me and saying, what a shit move that was. And Tommy was hot at me. And none of them knew at that moment that Terry was really Terry's idea. I called him with the idea, but Terry was the one that greenlit it, right? And because he knew it'd be good for business. And he the only time I'd see like a mischievous side, I would say like a ribbing side of Terry in ECW was like after the shows, and we'd be like at the hotel bar or whatever. Again, Vicky was always around. You know, if you were talking to Terry here, all you had to do was like do a quick scan, and Vicky would be someplace within 10, 15 feet, right? Just a really, really sweet lady. And you know, they would get at times feisty in the bars. You know, Vicky liked to have her drink, and she would walk by and say, someone would comment to me like, an asshole, something like just little things like that you could tell it was said in like a loving way, but just like this dance that they would do. Like Terry was like honestly attached to her hip. Like you could see that there was genuine love between those two. And, it's there could be endless stories about them. I could drone on. So like, it goes with your questions.